Okay, thank you. Just like to welcome everyone. Sorry I'm late. I had LEC on my mind and I went there. So I apologize. I'd like for both my colleagues to introduce themselves if they would. Karen, if you'll start first.
Karen Hiller, District 1.
Mr. Padilla, are you there?
Introduction.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Padilla?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I could barely hear you. I'm gonna put some earplugs in here. Mike Padilla, representing District 5.
Okay, and I'm the chair. Would like to welcome you, thank you, to the December 17th meeting. I'd like to make first thing on the agenda is to approve the minutes from November 30th. Have we had a chance to look at the minutes? Hello?
Move to approve.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilwoman Hiller. Mike, are you having technical difficulties?
I put some earplugs. I was having a hard time hearing you. I can hear you now.
Hey, you know, there was a commercial. Can you hear me now?
I've got my new tones in.
Okay, so Councilwoman Hiller made a motion to approve the November 30th minutes.
Second.
Okay. Councilman Padilla second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. 3-0. Okay, thank you. Review and discussion. First thing I'm going to kind of deviate a little bit off of what we're doing here. And I don't see that I got it. Okay. There was an article in the paper today. I want to discuss that. Did you guys see it?
You need copies that,
Yeah. Do you have one? She was supposed to give me one. I don't know if she
can you make us,
Is that?
that's two different ones, right?
Okay. Well, I can hand them right back to you, Karen.
Okay.
I told Liz to email me, but just so I can refer to it just a second.
Okay, sure.
And this is the Topeka Police Department adjusts portion of the use of force policy. I guess I was a little bit disappointed that we're going through this committee and we weren't aware that this was going to be in the paper, and we weren't aware that this was adjusted or tweaked or whatever. And I'd just like for somebody to speak on that if they would.
Okay. The chief is on, but
Oh.
if he wants me to speak on it, I can, or I know he was.
No, he was supposed to be here, so I'll let him speak.
He can hear you. I don't.
What's that?
I said you were supposed to be here. Yeah. Would you like to speak on that, please?
What's that?
Can you not hear me as well?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Are you guys having a hard time because I've got my mask on? Okay, everybody's shaking
Plus
their
the
heads,
mic.
yes. Okay. I will remove it when I'm talking. Ooh, okay. Chief, I seen the paper this morning, and I got a call, and there was just some things that I was concerned with, as well as one of the other council members, is that this came out in the paper at a time that we are going through this with committee, and we were never even told of this. Can you elaborate on this? How this came about, or do you know?
Well, I missed the very end of what you said there.
Can you elaborate? Go ahead.
Well, the policy change is just a wording change, and it's something that we've been looking at for probably about 6 months. And so the wording, I guess I don't understand what the concern is with anybody on this, because it's under the psychological intimidation portion of the policy. And all we did was remove that psychological intimidation such as blank stare, mean mugging, and verbal abuse without physical compliance. Then change that to nonverbal and verbal noncompliance in that paragraph there. And so basically what it's saying is it actually is broader in what we did and opened it up. And it gives the officers more leeway when it comes to laying the establishment or the framework for if and when force has to be used. Part of the problem with the terminology that was in there before is a lot of people had the impression that just because somebody blank stared or mean mugged an officer, that gave them the authority to use force. And that's not what that intent was. That's never been the intent, and that's never been our policy. And so the wording change was really to make that broader and take those specific things out of there.
Well, and I can appreciate that, Chief. The problem that I had is this is in committee, and we discussed that, and there was nobody said anything about this change. Even if it happened 6 months ago, nobody said anything about it. So to come out in the paper makes us look really like we're not informed or we're trying to keep something from the public. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate. So I think it's very important why this is in committee, that we get a clear understanding of what's being changed, when it's being changed, and I'm glad we had this meeting today to clarify that. So that's I wasn't really upset with what was changed. What I was upset with is that we didn't have any knowledge that it had been changed, and we have been discussing this, and then for it to come up in the paper, it's just not a good look.
Well, Councilwoman, our policies change and revise continuously. If you look at the version that language was taken out of, it was revised on October 14th. And so our policies are in constant evolution and updated to meet the needs and requirements of the community as well as the police department. And so, you know, these policy changes or adjustments weren't done to undermine anybody or anything like that. You know, there's never been a conversation that anytime we do a policy change or revision or update, that it's got to be approved. The police department does that. We have an accreditation standard that we meet. We have an accreditation company, organization that monitors policy. And so I would have thought that this would be something that the community and the committee would probably welcome, because it's one of those things that when we talk about working towards transparency and working with the community, that's what we're all about. And, you know, the revision of policy and update of policy and restructuring of policy is something that we do on a routine basis.
I would say, Chief, why this is in discussion, it's going to be very important that we know when these changes are made. As for me, it's very important. As the chair of this committee, it's very important that we discuss what changes has been made, so or are going to be made, or even sent to wherever. Because when the paper says we, I don't know who we is, because it didn't come out of my committee that these policy changes be made. And I know I'm not saying to change your practice. I'm just saying I think it's very important why this is in committee, that we get those changes or recommendations so that we know what the recommendations or what the changes are going to be. I think that's very, very important. There's just a lot of unrest of things, and that's why this was sent to committee, and we want to make sure that we stay on top of everything. It has nothing to do with our transparency or any of that. We understand that, but I don't know who the we is. Is it the SPCP? I don't know who we is. All I know is this came out and there was some concerns. And then when we went over this and this didn't get discussed, then it looks like we're trying to hide something. And that's not what my goal is to do here. My goal is to educate the public and to educate us as well, so that we make sure that we understand what's going on. But if things are changing, we don't know about it. We need to know why that change was. You just explained it. I appreciate that. I don't have a problem with it. But I just want to make sure as long as this committee is standing, I think it's very important, whatever policy changes are made, that this committee is made aware of. And I would appreciate that.
Okay,
I
Councilwoman, the only-
appreciate that, Councilwoman, but we do change policy quite frequently. And so are you saying that every policy change needs to be ran through the committee?
I'm saying everyone that you think that's going to be affected on especially the use of force, the ones that we have that are really hot topics right now, I would say that. Because we are trying to see if something needs to be changed or something doesn't need to be changed. And that's what we're tasked with doing, with educating, see what needs to be changed, if there needs to be a change. And I think that's going to be very, very important, especially crucial now, because people are waiting to see what recommendations that we're going to get out of this committee. They're waiting to see what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, or if we're going to do it. And I can't keep up with the changes if I don't know anything about it. And I don't understand what's so hard about bringing that recommendation or that change to one of our meetings, and we're having them monthly.
Well, it's not difficult, Councilwoman. We've been in charge of our own policy ever since I've been on the department for 34 years. And we update and change our policies as we see fit and to meet the needs. And so there was no undermining or anything like that. These things have been put in process and work for many months. And one of the things that I've done since I've been the chief is make sure that we've been transparent, that we work with the community and the public. And so this was a change that was under works way before, and you're probably correct. I suppose I should have ran that by you guys first to see what you thought, but we've never gotten approval like that before on any policy change. And so that's quite a drastic step, different move than we've done in the past, but I'm sure.
I don't think it's drastic.
The deputy chief will understand that as the interim.
I don't think it's drastic, though. I think it's to make sure that we all understand what we're doing. If that's the case, what am I doing here? I mean, other than I've been served with the task to go through to make sure our policies are not out of line. And if I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, that makes it hard for me. And that, I don't see what's so hard to say, hey, this is one that we talked about, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying not to make it. What I'm saying is just to inform us so that we know what's going on. That's why I'm taking my time going through every little thing. And so I just don't understand what's so hard about it, so that I'm not blindsided by any means. If you're working with somebody out there, or if there's tasks that you guys are working with, I would like to know all those tasks that we have so this doesn't happen again, because I think it's very, very important. Yes.
I think the chief kind of touched on it, and I just would like moving forward a little clear, if we can discuss for a minute or two, a little clearer view on what you say when you want to be aware of every policy revision that we're considering. Just the things that circulate or are centered around use of force and the bigger topics, or because, for example, we do policy change on how you clock in from work differently, or how you fill out this report differently. I mean, some of these things are very much minutia of operations. That's what I need, is a clear guidance on if you want the totality of everything that we're looking at as a revision. Certainly can be provided to you, but I will tell you it's got somewhat of volume to it, or if it's more just the bigger issue things, or that kind of discussion is what I'm looking for guidance.
Well, Deputy Chief, when we've been talking about use of force for the last 2 meetings, or has it have been 3, but I know 2 for sure, and then something like this presents itself, I'm not worried about them clocking in and out. I'm not worried about that.
I don't want to give you too much information either.
No, I don't want that. What I would like to know is, we've been talking about use of force, And now to come back and say, hey, we changed this. And when we've spent several meetings talking about it, I think we need to know that, hey, this is going to change and how the change came about or whatever. It would be no different. Yeah, the citizens are going to love this and rightly so. But let's say there was a change that came from, and I don't know how the changes come about. This is all new to me. But let's say the changes came from the FOP or some of the officers. Oh, we think that's, okay. And I understand, I've learned in the meetings, it does go up the chain. I would like to know where that came from and why we made that change. Because if it involves the citizens and they come back and they say, well, we didn't agree with that or we didn't know anything about it. That's exactly what I'm saying about this. We didn't agree with, I'm not saying I don't agree with it. I'm just saying I don't know anything about it. With what I've been educated so far, that hasn't come forth.
Okay.
And so if that's the case, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page so we don't have to go back. We've spent hours on this and I don't want to go back. I want to make sure that we serve everybody and everybody's informed and they understand. This never says, so we're working with the community. I'm getting community things that people are asking me to bring to the table that I'm telling them, I want to see what we have in place first. I don't even know if that needs to be changed or whatever. So that's where I'm coming from.
I appreciate the guidance. I think that gives me a clear...
If you have any questions, you can call me, you can call Karen, you can call Padilla. We would be happy. We don't want to spin our wheels. We want to go through this one big time. We want to understand what's going on. When I get emails that say you should have done this or you should have done, we have to dig in this. You guys know it. We don't. And so we have to dig in this and we have to make sure that it's to our liking when we come back with a recommendation to the council.
I understand.
And thank you. And that's what we've been tasked.
We don't want to spin our wheels either. We're right there with you.
We don't. Yes, Karen.
Maybe just a different approach on it. I don't know that you were at our first meeting, but you've certainly seen all the communication that we got, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And we had a list of all the different topics that had come up. And without looking at it, you probably know what they are. But anything that had to do with profiling or use of force or how a first engagement was handled. And we were given a whole section, maybe not complete yet. I didn't know if we were going to be being given sections as they came up on our agenda or whether we were given everything because we had it added to twice during the course of these meetings. But the idea that and I remember I made my own notebook before somebody gave me one. So something we got way early on had some yellow marks on it that said we're looking at upgrading this policy. I think overall, what this committee got charged with and what the public is interested in is to really understand how this department works. I for one, but I think all of us said, okay, fine, we've all seen the news about what works and what doesn't work and what other people are doing. We want to talk about what's happening in Topeka. And as much as possible, I think everyone's oriented towards celebrating the good things that we're doing. And so being current, as Councilwoman Ortiz says, just helps us know it's transparent. It shows that the department that business as usual is to update policies because you tell us when it's appropriate to what we have. And it reinforces that you're working. I did get a question from someone who's working which was a good one, which is asking how the officers are advised when these policies are changed. And so when it's appropriate, I'd like to hear that too.
Okay.
But again,
I can answer that question now if that's how you want to do it.
Okay.
I mean, it's very much, it's an automated system that's a database, and they receive an email in the Power DMS system that says this is the policy that's out. They're given a parameter of time frame for where they are to review and sign for that policy,
Gotcha.
which gives us accountability on the back end. But that's how it is, and there's an electronic record of the notification and the completion of that from step one all the way through the end.
And we heard that at our last meeting.
We did hear about that at our last meeting, and again, just to support Chair Ortiz, that the conversation was, okay, fine, how do people learn about it, and how do we know that they really got it, and so on, which is kind of where we left off last time. So if for our information, it's just that they just get an email
Right.
and they sign off that they read it. But something that's as major as, and again, I had to give my one copy to Councilwoman Ortiz, so I'm looking at what section, I don't know exactly what got changed, but I don't know if is there a sort of an explanatory, this is why this is coming down, and this is why we thought it was important, this is the kind of thing we want to see changed?
Well,
Good with that?
yes, and I think it's important to know the steps that it goes through in the
Okay.
review too. I mean, not only does it get reviewed by the chain of command, but it get reviewed by the policy review committee, which has elements of FOP and officers and supervisors and commanders. So those, all the way through the discussion, there's employee buy-in adds to the formation of the policy. So that obviously
good to know.
breeds itself into being able to be disseminated across the department before it officially is too, as it's in that formative stage. But, I think this is a good opportunity, albeit not the optimal trigger, a news media article, but it's a good discussion for us to have an expectation of what we knew with the policies, because we do take these as a routine manner of the way we do things. In this case, it was a section in a multiple page policy that was changed. And so the entirety of that policy wasn't changed. It was just that section. So when they are reviewing it, they would certainly have the opportunity to review the entirety of the policy, but it does focus them on this is where the changes are.
And one of the things, to Chief's great credit, I think people were really kind of amazed and excited and pleased when Chief Cochran posted the administrative policies on the website so people could see. Is there any sort of corresponding pop for a while on the website that notes the changes?
We just have we have a mechanism in place now where when we change the policy officially in the Power DMS system, it makes that change on the website, but it doesn't push out any kind of notifications to any groups that there's been changes. But it does ensure that the most up-to-date and current policies are on the website and publicly available, because some of these policies, especially with operational mechanisms, evolve with a great deal of frequency as technology changes and those
Sure.
things. So, but there's not a notification piece that on this policy that you're looking at on the public site that this piece has been changed on this date. But all of the policies have a header that says
That's what I was just saying,
when
so
they
the
were,
header would change.
yeah, when they were put into effect. So
You wouldn't know what got changed. You kind of
would-
have to
yeah,
Madam
have your
Chair,
old copy.
well, and you would kind of have to be able to know what the policies were.
Yeah, hold on just a second. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a need, as we do our business, to have some sort of a changes pop on there so that the average person who's looking at it, or an officer for that matter, could see what's changed in the last.
Well, the officers know. They have that piece internally when they're notified of the change. They would have the ability to see that, but the public version is just the final piece, the most current final piece.
And I'm not so much, I mean, Karen, we're discussing it. I think that's important for us as policymakers,
Yeah.
that we should, note of those changes. Hey, those are happening, or those got changed, or whatever.
Yeah.
Mike, I see that you wanted to talk.
yeah, I was waiting in line.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair. I just want to make something clear in my mind. And I think you've stated it, Councilwoman Ortiz, is that I don't think the intent, at least it's not mine, is to have the department bring everything to us for approval. I think the issue here for me anyway is right now when we're under such scrutiny of our work and what we're trying to do, that when it comes out in the newspaper before this committee is aware of a change, then questions can get asked of us, and it's difficult to make a response if we don't know the origin of the change. I know that the department is in continual change and review. The rest of the city doesn't, and that's what this committee is trying to do, is to let people know how that process and procedure works. So, I mean, if you carried it that far, we could get a notice every day that something's being considered. I just think that if something's going to rise to the level of a front page story, that a quick call memo, email, as a heads up that this is going to come out. This is a change that was considered, so that we as the body can respond to questions that we get about that. And so I want to make sure that too, I feel that this is still a coordinated effort, and coordination doesn't happen when announcements are made and the people involved in that work don't know about it. That's my rub, that more than anything. And we've had this happen before as a council, period. That sometimes the public information officers who are tasked with releasing this information don't take that extra step to let the governing body know in advance of something. It would be helpful. It has happened in the past when we knew that there was going to be something that comes out that could be, I don't say controversial, but certainly it's going to get a lot of attention. It's on the front page. So that's my issue. I don't need to have the police department bring every change to me or this committee, because I think that'd be cumbersome. But certainly something that we are right now specifically focused on, use of force and those kinds of issues. If a story's going to come out about it, it would have been nice to have a heads up as to this change coming. How that is accomplished by the chief and deputy chief and their staff is a matter of, I guess, routine, but that routine is known to them and not to the general public. So I just think that every opportunity that we show the community how continually the department is improving itself, I think it's important to let that come out so that it is a coordinated effort and there aren't any surprises. And that's my issue more than anything. I don't want to get to the point of having to see and hear every discussion that has to happen. But if something's going to make the front page, I think a quick memo to the body that's charged with looking into these issues is advised of. That's where I'm coming from. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you.
And I appreciate that, and I apologize. I'll take the blame on this, but this, like I said, was something that has been in the works for many months. It's not something that just came up. And, you know, I took the task after that August 25th meeting, a lot of scrutiny and stuff that people put on the police department to try and improve those things. So I took that as a task of things that we were changing. So there was no intent to undermine or anything or surprise this committee. There's things that we've been working on and things that we are working on. And that's all this was. And so there was no, it was an oversight on my part because it was something that we've been in the process on working on. It's not something that just came up and changed overnight.
Well, thank you. I will accept that apology. And if there's anything else that you're working on that you feel that is in our committee that we're talking about, I think that would be very beneficial to us, that we know if it's coming down the pipe. I'd appreciate it.
Could I make a quick comment?
Yes, you can, Councilwoman.
I concur. If it wasn't clear, I don't want to get in the way of adding a committee to look at your internal policies. But I also have my eye on the future a bit. I mean, part of the charge of this committee was to not only go through some process, but eventually come up with some recommendations if it seemed like there needed to be any. I don't have any illusion that this is a permanent committee. And so looking ahead at what kind of communication there would be when these sorts of things happen is I see kind of in the back of it part of our charge. And so if, for instance, this is just an ad hoc committee to kind of be able to profile the good things that you're doing so everybody has some more trust in the internal procedures, I want that to happen. And that's one reason for us to be alerted when it has to do with what we're looking at, because it profiles to the public that this is how you operate every day, if in fact, or how you react if something has come up. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But if in fact, looking down the line, regularly alerting if for instance, the SPCP is going to continue long-term, and there you're strengthening police and community relations, then it might be that there would be a thinking about future that a little alert that, you know, lasts for 90 days or something like that on your website, or that shows when the changes have been made. So somebody who looks at that could realize that the updates had occurred and when, because if they're not noted, you can't tell. I complain at council meetings sometimes. This is like bingo. I got to sit here with 5 copies of the thing and figure out what happened. So a little alert system might augment what you're doing in terms of posting. But also, if you do have a committee that long-term is going to be working on those kinds of things that rub with the community, then maybe making it a routine to alert them when those policies, maybe even engage them in considering the policies, but certainly alerting them when they've been done, so that key people do know, might be a good long-term practice.
Okay.
Thinking about it.
Okay, we're going to move on to 3, review and discussion. Annual use of force reports.
Yeah, if you want to put up the PowerPoint. And there's, on the front end of this PowerPoint, there's some information that was left over from the last meeting that we didn't get to, as far as some numbers from the citizen complaints, if you're agreeable to moving through that prior to getting to the use of force numbers.
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay. So if we can, all right, that's the PowerPoint from the last meeting. I sent an updated one. Most of it's the same, but there's a little bit on the front end if.
It got emailed.
Okay. If you want to jump to the slide on that, the one that you do have, and I will just go through verbally what I put on the front. So go to that, the numbers of the citizen complaints. If you want to move forward, do that right there. And then I'll just go through what I've added on the front, which was just basically a little bit of a policy reminder, so we kind of have context of what we're talking about, and then just some definitions. So I'd be glad to go through that. Yeah, right there. If you just want to leave that up and just bear with me while I go through the lead up to that. So these are some numbers that you see on the screen from our citizen complaints from the last 3 years, 2017, 18, and 19. On the front end of that, I just wanted to reemphasize from our policy on the professional standards unit 3.15 about the complaint process, just so everybody's back on the same page. The complaint process, the department shall make the complaint process available to both the public and employees. All complaints against the agency or its employees will be investigated. PSU shall accept all complaints regarding the department or its employees from any source, including telephone calls and anonymous tips. So before we just run through these numbers, I felt it was important that we run through the definitions of the dispositions there that you see. So sustained, you'll see that in the numbers. Sustained is the allegation is found to be factual and is sustained by competent evidence. Not sustained, insufficient evidence exists to prove or disprove the allegation. Unfounded, the allegation is not supported by the facts or is a false allegation. Exonerated, the allegation is factual and did occur. However, the involved employee acted lawfully and properly within policy and acceptable conduct. Misconduct not alleged in the complaint. Violations were discovered and confirmed that were not included in the original complaint, but occurred during the incident being investigated. Policy failure. The allegation is factual and appears improper. However, it does not violate department policy because no such policy exists. Department policy may have to be addressed regarding the allegation. And then finally, the disposition closed. Investigation of the allegation was terminated. The reason for the closing the case file shall be stated therein. This disposition shall also be assigned to any anonymous complaint which after the investigation lacks corroborative information or evidence to exonerate the employee. So those are the definitions of the dispositions that you'll see in the chart on the screen. Just some things that I wanted to point out, just in the name of transparency here was the number of citizen complaints that were received and investigated by our professional standards units over the past 3 years and what those dispositions were. I think it's important to point out the number of calls for service during those years. For example, 2017, we had 106,007 calls for service with 28 citizen complaints. 2018, 105,294 calls for service with 24 citizen complaints. And in 2019, 99,821 calls for service with 32 citizen complaints. Those complaints were investigated by professional standards. Those complaints came in the forms that were discussed in policy, anything from anonymous tips to formal complaints, and those are the outcomes of those investigations.
Oh, yes, yeah.
The one that catches my eye that's not on the chart is policy failure. How do you capture those? And
The reason they're not on the screen is we had none that were categorized under that, in that category, in that disposition of the complaints during that time frame. Yes.
okay. Because I think that's where, some of the citizen complaints are generated from of is it all right, or that kind of part of the charge of this committee.
Well, I think it's important to know too, I mean, what you're saying though is the policy failure piece is there's an issue with the policy, not so much that the policies are lined out in a way. To me, it's a good sign. It shows the strengths of the policy, because you either have, for the most part, sustained, not sustained, one of the other dispositions. In other words, you can figure out whether there was an issue or not, whereas the policy failure would be a bigger problem for us.
Well, I'm not trying to be critical, but for instance, I applaud the changes that we just were alerted about.
Sure.
Somebody figured that out because some incidents occurred that they said, hey, it was maybe okay with policy, but we should improve policy. So I just wondered. I don't necessarily. Somehow.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I agree with that
Really?
characterization. Okay. As far as, I mean, there's a lot of ways that policies can be formed up, but this one, I think, as it made clear in the news article, and the chief could certainly speak to it, was about community concerns. I don't know that it was specifically tied to
complaints.
A complaint per se. I think it was a larger issue that they had specifically with the way the wording was in the policy. So while that certainly is the case sometimes where there is a specific trigger of an incident that relates to a policy change, it's hard to generalize that.
Well, we're kind of in the dark, understand that.
Sure.
So we've seen the policy, and the committee and the public has seen 2 IPA reports.
Sure.
Maybe 3 or 2 reports on 3 incidents or something like that. And in at least one of those cases, it was the person was acting within policy, but there was some behaviors that weren't related to use of force, weren't exactly use of force, but that were not. And so those sorts of things are all we see.
And I think one of the simple ways to look at it is, in these over 300,000 calls for service in this 3-year period, and less than 100 complaints there, with that category missing, me putting it simply, we didn't have a case where we went, that's bad, we didn't think of that.
An adaptation of a policy or an evolution of a policy is not necessarily a failure of that policy, I guess is what.
No, it's healthy, understand.
Yeah,
I think that's fine. Just trying to figure out how the system's working.
I would be very concerned if we had a policy failure in an area, especially like use of force. I mean, we spend a great deal of time. You guys spend a great deal of time. The public spends a great deal of time. I mean, there is a lot of time that is spent nationally and internationally on the use of force policies for policing and community. So that would surprise me if we had a category in that. It's more what I've seen more where I would categorize a policy failure is we have evolving technology with something that creates a situation that we had not previously addressed, and sometimes we have to make the policy there. That's closer to what I would use as an example of a policy failure, because it's almost an area that you didn't have addressed that I would consider to be a policy failure. And I've only seen that in areas where technology evolves to the point that, like in other words, when we had license plate readers that first came out, we had to build a policy on that technology. We didn't have a policy that addressed how you use that. So if there had been an incident or a complaint before that, that would be an example of a policy failure because you had nothing on the books that covered how you were supposed to use that, if that helps.
Yes, I mean, the one we had today was, and I loaned away my copy, but you know, the decision that if somebody just gives you that dead-eye face and doesn't respond, that's not an automatic okay for use of force anymore is a big deal to me. I think it's great.
Right.
But, you know.
I think, I don't know how far we want to back up on that, but that wasn't the intent of the policy originally when that language.
I think it's a clarification language that
there.
we made to the public. That was never the practice or the policy where this triggers that.
Right.
But I think it was the way that it was read and interpreted that led to the clarification.
Yeah.
But the technology pieces, in my experience, has been the only time that I've seen an actual failure. You didn't have anything that covered this.
Gotcha.
But I agree with you. That's something that's very much that we have to explain to the community because that's only the experience that almost 50 years of experience here that we have to be able to really grasp some of that down the weed stuff.
And you have to remember.
I appreciate the question.
And you have to remember when things like that happen, so right now there's so much unrest. And when things like that happen, what are they trying to hide? You know, we get all those questions. Oh, because we brought this to the forefront, now they're trying to clean it up. I don't feel like we're trying to do any of that. And that's what we have to make sure that we're real careful with that.
I agree. You and I are sitting here open to answering questions and having discussions and bringing forth
because
policies.
our eyes can look at it differently, or somebody can tell us something that makes us look at it differently. And until that's cleared up, that might be how we look at it or not. You know, as for me, I do know the wording. I see that a lot in reports, you know. So I understand the wording of your, even your terminology. We've got to be real careful.
Absolutely.
You know, with that. And so we just want this to make sure that we are doing what we need to do and not just, because we have to go back and recommend that to the council members, but we have to look, you guys have got to look through their eyes as well. I think that was a good policy change, the wording, because that's how some people look at it, you know, whether it's,
Sure.
You know, mean mug just because you're staring them down. You know, I'll be honest, I've thought there's some officers that are rude, but you guys are kind of in that's kind of how you guys are built, and kind of like that square, to the point, answer the question, you know, not and we've got to remember that.
I think I find a lot of value in what you said. I think we always have to look at it from the citizen that doesn't know what we know. I agree with that 100%.
But when you pull out that card, or you pull out that sucker, or you give that person that hug, like, oh, damn, they're human.
We are. I can attest to that. We are.
So anyway, okay. Sorry about that, Karen.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. We interrupted you.
Okay, so like I said, I wanted to run through that from the last meeting, and if there was any questions that came out of that, I wanted to get to that before we moved on to the annual use of force and those numbers. So if we're ready, we can.
Mike, do you have any
Move.
questions?
No, thank you.
You don't have any questions?
No, thank you for asking.
Okay, well, I'll be in trouble if I don't, so, okay, continue on there.
Okay. Yeah, we can move on to the next one there. Clearly, the annual use of force reports are lengthy. There's a lot of information there. I've put a few throughout the remainder of at least this portion. I've put a few slides in there with some numbers for discussion. But obviously, you guys have the reports in their entirety at your fingertips there, so we can obviously answer questions from that as well. I wanted to run through some of the 3-year comparison numbers that's on the screen. Now, 2017, 18, and 19 is what we're talking about again. And we discussed a minute ago the number of calls for service. You'll see there in that second column. Total number of arrests, for example, in 2017, 5,533 arrests, which makes up 5.2% of those calls for service. Out of those 106,007 calls for service and the 5,533 arrests, we generated 164 use of force incidents, which is only 2.9% of those 5,533 arrests. Out of those 164 incidents, 3 use of force complaints. So that's a percentage of 1.8% where we had a complaint generated from a use of force incident. And then just running through the rest of it, 2018, 5,256 arrests, 202 use of force incidents, 5 complaints generated, 99,821 in 2019, 5,313 arrests, 206 use of force incidents with 6 use of force complaints. I think what this demonstrates, we have a high volume calls for service, a high number of calls for service. And then from those calls for service, we generate a number of arrests. We have a very low incident of use of force that come out of those arrests. If you look at an average there of the 5,000 arrests per year and the number of use of force incidents, I think as the chief mentioned in one of the earlier meetings that some people just don't want to go to jail. But we have a low number of incident where force is applied. And keep in mind that these number of use of force incidents are defined through what triggers a use of force event. And that can be a very low-level empty hand control technique that triggers that use of force that is captured in those numbers. So I think we're very fortunate in the low number of incidents or occurrences that we have. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that are generated from that slide.
So, on the total arrest, if you arrest me, I get out of jail, then you arrest me again, is that, it's still considered another time? It's not
Certainly,
the same number, right?
And if I arrest 3 people at one scene, that would be 3 arrests.
So you're talking about every individual
arrests.
Okay.
Yes.
I just know that there's some people that they've been arrested, they get out and you guys arrest them, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to make sure that we're like, oh God, that's still Charlie Joe or whoever.
No. Each one individual.
Oh, each one individual. Okay. And then also, is there a timeline that they have to complain, to file a complaint?
No, we'll take a complaint in any form.
Yeah.
No. What I'm saying is, okay, so let's say this happened a year ago. Do they have is there a timeline that they have, like after 2 years? So you would go back 2 years later or whatever?
Sometimes, obviously, it affects your ability to investigate it the longer the
Right.
time goes through, but there's not a parameter that says you've missed the statute of limitations for when you can do this or anything like that. But it obviously hampers the investigative ability sometimes.
Right, okay. Karen, did you have any questions on that?
I do have a couple.
Okay.
We've got in our notebooks a much more detailed breakout. And so I was on 2017 as you were talking. It's got a 10-year history in it. The others, it looks like, are a little shorter. But when I look at 2017 use of force utilized and compare the number to the number that's here, if you added up all 4 columns, it would be substantially higher. So when you detail that out, if more than one use of force was employed, does that get counted in each column, or how does that work?
I guess a little.
The chart that I have for 2017, for instance, says that this chart says there were 164 incidents. This chart says there were 158 incidents with verbal direction, 137 with empty hand,
Okay.
24 with active pointing.
So
Some of those
in
multiples.
one incident, there may be multiple layers
Okay.
of reportable for the same officer may use verbal direction,
And escalate.
which escalates into an empty hand control tactic, which
Okay.
may, escalate, de-escalate, up and down.
Okay.
So that's why you add up those numbers of types of force may be higher than the total number of incidents.
That was my question, just trying to understand, because if it escalates, I can see that it would be added. Also, and something that came up in all the public controversy was racial disparities and so on. And this department, as I understand it, is way ahead of many in terms of keeping records about race and gender in terms of those incidents. But if you could discuss a little bit about the race and gender split in the incidents that we've had, how that compares to community, or why it might be different than our population demographics.
So we track the number of use of force incidents. We track the gender and the race of those individuals. We keep stats on all that, which we've placed here in the annual reports. For example, I'm looking at the officer, the race and gender of subject and use of force. So, for example, in 2017, 74 of those 164 incidents involved white males, 12 white females, 53 black males, 6 black females, 15 Hispanic males, 1 Hispanic female, 1 Indian male, 1 Indian female. And then we've since had the animal category in there, but we've since kind of retooled that. So.
Okay. But there have been comments from the community about disparity between the use of force incidents with minority individuals. You don't hear as many comments men versus women, but if you could address that a little bit.
Which disparities specifically are you pointing to?
I think she's talking more in a broader sense.
In a
Jamie,
broader
you know.
population sense.
Yeah,
About
and I think-
20% of our population is African American, for instance, and so when 32% of the use of force incidents in 2017 were black males.
I think one of the ways that we need to discuss that is when we talk about calls for service. These incidents, we have to keep in mind that these aren't all self-initiated activities on the part of the officer. Many of these are calls for service that the officer's dispatched to, and they really don't know till they get there most times
If they
who
are.
is there,
Yeah.
male, female, race factor, anything, until they've arrived. So in many of these cases, we have no say over the citizen that we're going to encounter when we arrive. If that kind of
I think
answers part of your
I
question,
think I would
right?
add to that too, kind of what you touched on before. I mean, this agency has tracked demographics in their use of force reporting and in a lot of other categories. One of the first things the chief did when he came on was implemented a program where citations and self-initiated suspicious person contacts. We track demographic information across a lot of areas that are neither required nor common practice at a lot of agencies across the state. We do that so that we can answer the questions to the public with the numbers. This is the number of information we have. We don't have anything to hide. This is the numbers that we have and track it. Now, getting a handle on why those things occur, there's a lot of conversations and societal factors that feed into that. But I think I understood what you were trying to get to us at on this is, do we have the explanation for why that specific number is higher than this? I think that's a broader conversation that we have to touch on a lot of areas. But I would emphasize the point that this agency in this city has gone above and beyond for a number of years, and we continue to move forward in how we look at demographic information so that we can address what we need to address if there's disparities on those and have those conversations. I don't know that right now we know, hey, this is the answer for this specific stat, but it's a place to begin with us keeping the stats and looking at the information would be my answer.
Well, because you have them for us. And I think in part, perhaps you touched on, again, part of our charge, a major part of our charge is to draw out this conversation from you and look at whether, if in fact there's a disparity, is it because of the police or are there other reasons?
Sure.
So that as a community we can address it. So again, I'm asking the questions that we're here for. And to go back to what Captain Haltom said, for the most part, either this is a yes or no or explain it question, are the incidents when use of force occurs in response to a call rather than an officer-initiated event?
That would be information that we would have to go back and extract out of each incident individually.
To be honest with you,
So
that's a great question. And that's not a category that we have the total data, but that's not a category that we've broken out in regards to, was this a use of force that was at a call for service self-initiated? So I would like to see what that is, to be honest with you, but that's not a category that we've broken it down
Just
in.
trying to do
I like
my due diligence and asking the questions that people have been wondering.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing, and I'm sure we can look at the data and break it down in that category, especially when you specifically keep it to where there are uses of force or complaints. Those are manageable numbers for us to go back historically, but I don't know that that's a category
it's
that
not a
we've
category
done.
that we break out. Yeah.
So it's a good question. Great, excellent display of the reason why we have the conversations.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Don't see Mike.
Mike, did you have any questions?
No, thank you for asking, Chair.
Mike, I need you to wake up and get some questions going here.
I'm awake and I'm doing a lot of listening. There's a lot of talking going on.
Okay. Continue on, please.
Okay. And if you want to move to the next slide, and there we go. Okay, so we're back on track. We're back on track. So I put this on here just to lead into the numbers on our lethal force or deadly force numbers, which we'll look at in the next slide. Keep in mind when we read through this is related to the officer's use of deadly force. So under KSA 215221, and this is right out of our use of force policy, deadly force means the application of any physical force which is likely to cause death or great bodily harm to a person. Any threat to cause death or great bodily harm, including but not limited to the display or production of a weapon, shall not constitute use of deadly force, so long as the officer's purpose is limited to creating apprehension that the officer will, if necessary, use deadly force in defense of him or herself or another to effect a lawful arrest. So moving to the next slide with the numbers, if you would. So just going back several years here, to provide the committee with the overall look and the overall numbers. 2019 going back to 2013, you'll see the calls for service breakdown there at the bottom, 803,292 calls for service. Over that 7-year period, we had 6 lethal force incidents, which equates to a very small percentage that you see there, 0.000075%. 2019 we had 0 incidents. 2018 we had 2. 2017 1. 2016 0. 2015 1. 2014 1, and 2013 1. So once again, this is kind of the trend that we see, even in a more drilled down sense, I guess. Our use of force incidents compared to calls for service and arrests is very low. And then our lethal force incidents are extremely low compared to the number of calls for service. And if we did the math on the number of arrest incidents over those 7 years, it's a very, very low infrequent occurrence.
I think that's some good numbers there, real good numbers. So this has, oh, never mind, I counted wrong. Never mind, okay. All right, are there any more questions on the use of force? Mike, do you have any questions on any before we move on? Councilman Padilla, are you okay?
I don't have any questions then.
Okay. Karen, do you have any questions? Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on to fleeing vehicles.
Okay. You're gonna jump, there you go, thank you. Kind of the same thing, we'll set a little context with some snippets out of our vehicle operations policy, which you guys have in the entirety. And we'll move to some numbers. I think you'll see a shift in some of the numbers in the more recent year here. And I think in one of our previous meetings, we had just grazed that topic, and Chief Cochran had mentioned the change in that policy and more restrictive policy. So that you'll see that in the numbers, and we'll kind of explain that. So, but in our vehicle operations policy 4.11, I want to just cover a couple things. Vehicle pursuits may only be initiated when the immediate danger to the officer and the public created by the pursuit is less than the immediate or potential danger to the public should the suspect or suspects remain at large. For purposes of this policy, pursuit is defined as driving outside the normal rules of the road in an effort to follow and apprehend a fleeing suspect. So that's a very, I mean, you can look at it 2 ways. That's a very general statement, but it's also fairly restrictive when we get down to it. If the danger that the bad guy poses to the public is so great that we have to apprehend that person now, that pursuit might be allowed to continue. That's how restrictive and drilled down we've gone with this policy. And we'll get into some more of that here in just a minute. I want to go through a few numbers real quick. So kind of paint a picture here of what we're talking about and what this equates to, the number of pursuits that occur, apprehensions, and so on. In 2017, there were 35 vehicle pursuits. In 2018, there were 48, and now you see where the policy change has occurred and the impact it has on our number of pursuits. 2019, 10 pursuits. Out of the 35 pursuits in 2017, 16 apprehensions, 48 pursuits in 2018, 24 apprehensions, and the 10 pursuits in 2019, there were 7 apprehensions. So going back to the policy, on the vehicle pursuits and some of that, what is allowed, what isn't. We go to 4.11.5 in the vehicle operations pursuit policy there. Vehicle pursuits may only be initiated when the immediate danger to the officer or the public created by the pursuit is less than the immediate or potential danger to the public should the suspect remain at large. Officers shall not assume an operator or passenger is involved in something more serious just because he or she is fleeing. They must rely on the totality of circumstances known at the time. So we can't build it into our mind, our assumption that just because this person is fleeing, they must be up to something more than that turn signal violation or stoplight violation. We have to act on the information that we have. Officers shall, when deciding to initiate or continue a pursuit, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, officers shall consider all the circumstances affecting the public and officer safety, including the type of the offense, erratic driving, speeds involved, type of vehicle being pursued, presence of minors in the pursued vehicle, involvement of hostages, known information about the suspect's mental condition, impairment, or dangerous propensities, information regarding the location to which the pursued subject is likely to be heading, including knowledge of his or her residence. It's kind of an important one. If we think we know who it is and we think we know where they're going, why are we pursuing them at high rates of speed across the city? The involvement of weapons, likelihood that the subject can be apprehended by other means, and all general safety considerations identified earlier in this policy. We move on to the authorized and prohibited pursuits. And this is the authorized pursuits is actually drilled down very specific. Pursuit driving may be undertaken and continued only when it is reasonable to do so in view of all surrounding circumstances. In any event, it is specifically prohibited unless the involved officer has a reasonable belief that the subject to be pursued has committed a violent felony and where there is immediate need to capture the suspect, protect the public, or has created an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury to another person or a substantial threat to the safety of another person. For example, their intoxication level or their inability to drive and the way they're driving creates such a danger to the public that by letting them go, they're actually creating more of a danger. And then we just define violent felony at the bottom. I think it's important for the public and this committee to understand when we talk about authorized pursuits, and we hear the term terminating pursuits, and we can, I think that's in the next slide, if you want to bump to that while I discuss that. As you can see by the policy, the officer has a great deal of responsibility during these pursuits. They have a lot of things that they take into consideration, but we like the backup system too. So the supervisor has a even greater responsibility in these incidents too, to be monitoring them immediately, to be in concurrence that the pursuit should be allowed to continue. And when I talk about the pursuits being terminated, this is a big shift, and I think that the deputy chief and chief would probably back me up on that. 20, 30 years ago, I think law enforcement agencies would chase cars till the wheels fell off. But we've gotten smarter, best practices, evolving policy, keeping the entire community in mind on these incidents that are inherently dangerous. We have really drilled down to when we will and when we won't. And we've actually empowered and encouraged our officers, our supervisors, our commanders to self-terminate pursuits. And that is unquestioned when that happens. If a supervisor orders that a pursuit is terminated, that is unquestioned. It happens, it occurs. If a commander, if a supervisor is the one involved in the pursuit, then the commander, the watch commander, any commander can terminate that pursuit, and it is unquestioned. It occurs. So looking at those numbers, in 2017, like we said, 35 pursuits. 9 of those pursuits were terminated by the officer who is involved in the pursuit. 7 of those were terminated by the supervisor. 48 pursuits in 2018, 10 terminated by the officer, 5 terminated by the supervisor. And then out of the 10 pursuits in 2019, 1 terminated by the officer and 2 terminated by the supervisor monitoring the pursuit. So just to elaborate a little bit on the supervisor responsibilities during a vehicle pursuit, I'll just read a small section here in the policy. Supervisor responsibilities and procedures. Upon notification that a pursuit has been initiated, all units shall keep the radio channel clear while the authorizing supervisor ascertains all the necessary information from the primary unit in order to determine if the pursuit will be allowed to continue. Upon notification of the pursuit, the authorizing supervisor, who may be any sworn department supervisor, shall promptly acknowledge by radio and take command of that pursuit. Ensure compliance with this policy, immediately terminate pursuits not authorized under this policy. They'll remain in the authorizing supervisor position until the pursuit is terminated or is relieved by a higher authority. They will continually weigh all objective risk factors in permitting a pursuit to continue. Carefully consider whether the need to apprehend the suspect has been fully weighed against the dangers created by the pursuit. Proceed to the termination point of the pursuit if the violator's vehicle stops, and coordinate any available support such as canine support or aerial support. Assess any damage that may have been caused by a TVI or a tactical vehicle intervention technique. So as I said earlier, that there's a lot of weight on the supervisor in monitoring these pursuits, making a decision if it's even going to be allowed. If it continues, they're continually monitoring. Just because the supervisor authorizes it in the first part of that pursuit does not mean that pursuit's going to continue. They can terminate that thing at any point, and it will be terminated unquestioned.
Can you give me some reasons for termination? I mean, I know like a lot of people say, man, the police were on them and then they just let them go. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm talking in their eyesight, the community eyesight. And I've said to them, well, I know circumstances like in residential or busy, I see that we have pulled drastically away from it seems like when I first got on the council in 2005, we were just doing a lot of pursuits, and then we started backing off, quite a bit. And the numbers kind of show that too. I think so.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was saying, I've told people with circumstances, surroundings, how busy the traffic is, whether it's residential, whether it's kids. So can you kind of give us some of the things of why they would terminate? Are those some of the reasons?
Those are some of the reasons. And we're talking about the supervisor termination on that point. What we see, just to back up one step there, what we'll see and what you'll hear in the radio traffic is you'll hear an officer initiate a car stop, and you'll hear the vehicle's not stopping, or the vehicle's speeding up. The vehicle it looks like it's going to elude me. I'm shutting down. You'll hear that within the first 5-10 seconds of that incident. And what that tells me, without even asking the question, is that officer knows this policy. That officer has followed his training, and he knows, or she knows, that the reason that we were stopping that car does not rise to the level of allowing a pursuit to occur. So I'm not even going to get involved in that pursuit.
And that's what he means by shutting down?
I'm shutting down. It means I'm turning off my lights, I'm turning off my sirens, I'm going to change directions. We'll find them another day.
Okay.
To jump forward to your question, though, the supervisor, some of the reasons a supervisor may terminate a pursuit, a authorized pursuit, is just what you're saying. Road conditions, weather conditions, lighting conditions, residential streets. Our supervisor is very keen in knowing the areas that their officers are working. They may hear an officer go down a street and they're like, oh, that's a narrow street and the lighting's bad and the street lights aren't fantastic over there. No, we're not doing this. And they'll terminate that pursuit. A pursuit
there's a school getting out of session that's coming up, or there's a church gathering getting out, or all of those things are considered.
The direction of the pursuit. We may be in a pretty safe position, running smooth. The pursuit's going great. We're in an authorized pursuit. But where are we headed? And what time of day is it? Are we headed towards downtown? Is it 4:30 in the afternoon, and our citizens are going to be leaving work and getting in their vehicles, not knowing this thing's coming? And those are all things that our supervisors take into consideration. And I hear that quite a bit when a pursuit starts moving towards a congested area of town, or a soon-to-be congested area of town, depending on the time of day. Kansas Avenue, Topeka Boulevard, they'll want to make a corridor. That is definitely a consideration for our supervisors.
If it's a known offender, in other words, the person who's committing the violation, the constant weight is, who are they? Do we know who they are? What is it that they're wanted for versus the danger to the public? So if the offense is a low level, or if it's a felony warrant, but we know who they are, like you said, and sometimes I think that you can point this out to the citizens too. If they're watching and the police car may go away, there are some times where perimeters are then set up around a person's house or where we think they might be going to. And some of those apprehensions occur out of sight, maybe, they don't necessarily make the connection, but there are ways to continue to have the apprehensions done and do it in a safer manner to the public that don't necessarily always equate to pursuit.
Right. I just wanted that clarification because, I've heard, they were chasing them, they had them, and then they just let them go. And I'm like,
Got a hand.
oh, I'm
Madam
sorry.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this particular subject, I'd like to make a comment. I have seen, coming from the public, and some of it has been unduly critical of what I think is a very thoughtful process that has taken place by putting this vehicle pursuit policy in place. Some people believe that because of this policy, the police are not letting the police do their job. Or letting criminals get away. That they're being hamstrung or handcuffed by policies such as this, and preventing officers from doing their job. I've read those comments, I've seen them, and from experience, and now even more so, I think it's commendable that the department has put this much thought into vehicle pursuit. Because sometimes people think that the danger to the community comes only from a firearm or a knife or something like that. But when you have a vehicle traveling down the road at any kind of speed, 20 miles an hour is way more than you need to kill somebody in a car accident. And some of these pursuits could get much higher than that. I just think it's commendable that the department has put so much work into this, because these are dangerous situations that if not immediately addressed and not immediately taken care of, could really, really cause harm to everyone involved, officers, citizens, bystanders. And so I think it's extremely important for us to give an acknowledgement to these numbers, because you see that the numbers have gone down. And I like what the deputy chief said, especially when you know it's a known offender, you know who the person is. Very likely you'll be able to find out where he's going to be and take other means to take those people into custody without endangering others. So this is where I think sometimes this area gets overlooked, but I really think that they've taken the necessary steps to continue to do their job, to effect arrests when they need to, but to reduce the risk to the public and to the officers themselves. So I want to commend the chief, Captain Holton, and the deputy chief for taking the time to lay this out, because I think these are important procedures that are proving themselves to be helpful to this community. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. I concur. Yes, Councilwoman.
Thank you. It's interesting to look at percents, I think. In 2019, when the policy went down, the 6 out of the 10 pursuits resulted in crashes, 7 in apprehension. So pretty obviously that they crashed in order to catch those. So your 60% would look pretty high. On the other hand, that 6 is substantially less than in the years when there were more chases. And also there weren't any police cars in any crashes that have to do with police officers as well as the vehicles. So just an observation that we have to watch it with percents, I guess. But could you talk for a few moments about the kinds of things that Councilman Padilla was bringing up? I know that anecdotally, just watching the news, that I don't know what the percent is, but often these are stolen vehicles. And our department seems to do pretty well at picking up the stolen vehicles. So with that, just to sort of an aside, if you know, what is the success rate in actually capturing the people that we didn't chase and resolving whatever that issue was?
Well, I think there's a couple questions in there.
Yeah,
and I think it's
maybe.
important to understand the policy revision, what
Okay.
Catherine was talking about. The authorized pursuits, and when he uses the word authorized pursuits, the level of crime that is now required to do that, an auto theft is the example that you used, simply by itself would not be
Would not do
sufficient
it.
for an authorized pursuit. So it's a violent person felony. It's that balancing act that we talked about of danger to the community by the officer and the danger to not make the apprehension. But
Right.
that's also why I wanted to say and talk to you about that percent, because the number of pursuits that we do now, because that threshold for the underlying crime is so much higher, has dropped the numbers. But also, it's the way more serious.
But those are the bad
incidences
ones. Yeah,
for-
that was okay.
and that's what I'm saying. So sometimes those incidents have a higher percentage of not optimal results because that is a pursuit that would have been completed all the way from the beginning and otherwise made it through that vetting process the entire time of this is way more dangerous to not make the apprehension
Exactly.
than it is to. So you're
No, I
talking
follow
about a
that.
very high level of crime offender that you're trying to think. So sometimes those things breed themselves to not optimal results, more crashes, et cetera.
Well, and sometimes it's just something minor and you just let them go. But the flip side of that, I was trying to explore a little bit. You made reference to it that, hey,
Right.
if we know this person, we know where they're probably going, we can get them. We don't have to chase them to do it. Do you have any-
Anecdotally, I can tell you that I know some of the pursuits that we've had this year. I mean, they have been armed robberies in progress involving kidnappings. I mean, the high level offenses, which, you know, are more problematic chases and often have conclusions to that degree. So, but an auto theft, you know, in our current policy would not be sufficient. So there are no authorized pursuits for a simple auto theft absent any other factors that you're looking at here.
No, I was just thinking of what I read, because sometimes it's an armed felon in a stolen vehicle
Sure.
who just did something and everyone knows it.
Yeah, in that
I get
case,
that.
in that case where you had the armed felon and you had some other things besides just the stolen car, but the days of this policy, you see that reflected more in the past years where a stolen car at some points in this policy revision were sufficient on itself. It's just not now. So it would be easy to answer that for you since the policy's effect, because a stolen car by itself wouldn't be contained here because it wouldn't be authorized.
Well, where I was going with that was just to maybe explain it to the public, but also to see if you all are satisfied with where it is, because I know we've had some chases, in fact, some that have involved crashes, but it's been maybe the highway patrol coming into the city limits and having the chase, not our guys, but other law enforcement agencies that are authorized to do those sorts of chases that occur within the city limits.
Yeah, I
Right.
would tell you that, I mean, obviously, other agencies have other policies. I am very comfortable with the policy that we currently have at the police department as our standard. And I think our men and women do a great job of implementing it, because we can't really articulate to you to balance all of those factors as an officer while you're operating a vehicle and running the radio to get support,
think
and
it's
the
amazing.
supervisor is doing the same thing as all the units are moving into the area to do this. They do an exceptional job of doing it. Obviously, other agencies have other policies and other perspectives, and a lot of that is based on, you know, their community's expectations or those things. This thing wasn't built in a day. It's a formative process, but I'm very comfortable. I know the chief was, and I would definitely commit to continuing that on. But the policy is one piece. The exceptional job, the way our people implement the policy, is what makes me even more comfortable. Sometimes there are things that, in these high-level things that are authorized, that we have to deal with now that are too dangerous to the public to not make an apprehension. You know, the
Well, and
results are what they are.
I wanted to double check, because I too have heard, I think from either advocates for the police or current officers, I'm not quite sure what the channel was, of people who wanted us to be able to do chases again.
Oh, there's
Wanted this
always
committee to be thinking about that.
There's
so-
always debate in regards to that, and I think it's a good discussion, and I think, like so many things that we're talking about, there are different perspectives on it. I mean, there is not one universal standard for law enforcement agencies, let alone different segments of the community on that. So I think it's a good discussion to have, but I took your question to be is, am I comfortable with it?
Yes, it was.
And I am.
Appreciate that.
But I'm also comfortable with discussions, because a lot of times people have conceptions, which is what this committee's about, I think,
Right.
in some regards, that educate them beyond that. And I think that that's why I made the point that Councilman Padilla then reiterated. Just because in that moment, the officer or the supervisor makes the decision not to make that apprehension, doesn't mean the police department no longer is trying to apprehend that person for all time. We just have alternative methods, and like I said, we do a really good job on the back end of those things. Without that, I mean, there was a lot of stolen cars over the years that were recovered and damaged, and that was always somewhat ironic, I thought, to me in my career too, because that's not exactly the intent either. So those things are all formative, but they're all based on community expectations, and each department has to be comfortable with their own policies. I mean, we certainly assist other agencies with different policies, but we have a policy piece in ours that even lines out the level of assistance that we will offer to other agencies that are involved in these kind of things, and how we do it. So there's a great deal of thought and effort that goes into this one, as well as the use of force.
Yeah, it is pretty devastating when your car gets stolen, then it gets wrecked in a chase.
Well,
Or if
clearly.
innocent parties are hurt, which
Yeah.
has happened
Yeah, I mean,
in a crash.
And I know Councilman Padilla, from his history, has seen the devastation of motor vehicle accidents, and
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, it can be entirely life altering for all parties involved. So
Thank you.
Yeah, and if we want to look at impact on, you mentioned in there about the success and our ability to apprehend, and has it had an impact on that? I mean, if we can just, kind of envision these numbers, and we go back to our total number of arrests, and not that that's a bragging point, but when we're talking about our ability to apprehend, when we've made these policy changes, if you look at 2018 with 48 pursuits, we have a policy change, and in 2019, we dropped down to 10 pursuits. In 2018, we had 5,256 arrests. Pursuit policy change. In 2019, 5,313 arrests. We didn't see a big drop off in our ability to make apprehensions, at least in our total number of arrests, impacted by a change in our.
We just found
policy.
better, safer, more efficient ways
We're
to
getting
make the
creative.
public safe.
Well, you guys are good at
Technology
that.
helps. I mean,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah,
all
that's true.
evolving. That's where it is. I mean, we'll figure it out. I promise you. We'll work hard and we'll figure it out.
And the criminals figure it out too by word of mouth. They're not as dumb as we think they are. They're smart. They're saying, man, he might not get you, but he might be they know what time it is too, so they know what to
We might
expect.
be parked in your driveway when you get home. I said, we might be parked in your driveway when you get home.
Yeah, they know what time it is.
Yeah.
Okay, continue on.
And I think if you want to bump to the next slide, I think we touched on some of those numbers. So just the offender vehicles that resulted in crashes, third-party crashes. I'm not going to read through all of those numbers, but you can see there like for example, 2019, 6 of the offender vehicles resulted in some type of crash. Third party 1, parked vehicles 0, and police vehicles 0. It's, I think, a bit of a testament to the officers' training and driving abilities there. 2018, if you think back to the 48 pursuits and 2 police vehicles involved in accidents. If you want to bump to that next slide. And this is just a further breakdown of injuries involved as a result of those pursuits and the crashes involved. So you can see the zeros across the board there in 2017 and 2018. We had 2 officers with minor injuries, as I recall. And 2019, 3 offenders injured and 1 third party injured. But then I think, like the deputy chief elaborated on, those pursuits that we were involved in 2019 were a very small number of high-level offenders, very dangerous person felonies that we needed to apprehend that person. That's why I think you'll see a little bit of shift in those numbers there.
Those are for the total year, right? Those are right. Okay, I'm just making sure. That's good.
Oh, in 19, over half of them crashed themselves, and the officers didn't get hurt. Nobody else. However that.
I don't know. There's just like one year it seemed like, dang, here's another crash. Here's another crash. I don't know. I don't remember what year that was, but it's like, oh my goodness, Okay.
So if we want to move on to the foot pursuits, we'll touch on that a little bit.
Sure.
And you want to move to the next slide. I don't want to read this entire thing to you, but it's out of our policy 6.40 on foot pursuits. I think it's just important to know that the policy really outlines that there are considerations that go into foot pursuits as well. They're a high-risk undertaking. Foot pursuits present communication challenges, fatigue on the part of the officer, and at the end of a foot pursuit, when an apprehension is taking place, fatigue is not a good thing.
Right.
The officer may be unfamiliar with the area. These are just some of the considerations, and we also go back to some of the others with the type of the offense. Why are we chasing this guy? Who is this person? Do we know where they live? And you'll see a lot of that overlap with the vehicle pursuit policy as well. So there are a lot of considerations that go into the foot pursuits. So deciding whether or not to pursue, this is straight out of policy too. Although it is at an officer's discretion to initiate a stop, it is the suspect or violator who decides to precipitate a foot pursuit by fleeing. An officer's decision to pursue on foot shall be made with an awareness and appreciation for the risk to which the officer and the others will be exposed. No officer or supervisor shall be criticized or disciplined for a decision not to engage in a foot pursuit if the officer's assessment the risk exceeds the need for apprehension. So that officer makes the call, you know, this isn't happening, this isn't worth it, the risk to me, the risk to others is too great. There's no threat of discipline or any backlash from that decision whatsoever on the part of the officer or the supervisor. So the foot pursuits, I sent that policy, I think, early on. We talked about some of the factors that the officers consider: the fatigue, severity of the offense, in determining whether to engage in the pursuit. Officers consider things such as location of the approach, the availability of supporting officers prior to contact. And this is something our supervisors are really good. I like to brag on our supervisors when I get the opportunity. But supervisors track a lot of things during their shift all at one time, and technology has helped that. But I know from, you know, back in the day before we had the nice computer screen sitting in front of us telling us how many available units we had and how many units were on calls, I kept track of how busy we were. And if I heard one of my officers get involved in a foot pursuit and I knew that no other officer was available, every other officer is on a call currently, not that they couldn't break away, but they're not readily available, I may not let that foot pursuit take place. Because once again, we're looking at the risk to that officer, what may happen at the end or the termination of that pursuit, because they're on their own, because every other officer in the city is tied up on a call. And our supervisors keep all of those things in mind. There's factors that they are tracking throughout the shift that quite honestly amaze me sometimes. So,
And that's why the culture shift away from there being any kind of stigma from the supervisors, the officers on foot pursuit or vehicle pursuits on making good decisions and ending it is such an important thing, because our people have to be thinking all the time and balancing the safety of the community versus the need for apprehension in everything that we do all the time. And that's a lot of things that are going on. But to be most effective in the training is to shift the culture and have that be consistent across vehicle, foot, pursuit, use of force. Always evaluating, always assessing is basically what we have to be doing, and they do a great job of that.
Just a question, again, from trying to think of the things that the citizens are asking us when these are over. If someone doesn't engage in a vehicle pursuit or a foot pursuit, they can probably pretty safely say anything, and it would be within policy for them to have independently made that decision not to engage. Yet, if from a supervisory perspective, a pattern would emerge that this person's simply not doing what they could have, looking at the circumstances and so on, how does that get addressed?
Well, this, like Jamie said, I think he kind of touched on it already. I mean, your supervisors, the level of the structure of the agency is set up for that. But, you know, your supervisors need to know what's going on in regards to that. But I would say if what you're talking about is we have an officer who doesn't engage.
a fail to engage.
And that's kind of the terminology that we would be talking about. That would generally come to light in a lot of other situations that are reviewed as well. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, that if an officer said, because of these factors, that I was aware of. I mean, the supervisor's going to meet with them and say, why did you do this or why did you not do this? And they're going to have that conversation and justification. But those pieces are left because that officer is in the scene and knows what's going on and articulating it. But if we had an officer who was failure to engage in regards to a lot of things, I think we would see those things in use of force reviews and other complaint reviews as well. But they do talk through these situations about why did you terminate, why did you not terminate, just like any other process where it would have to be articulated. But I don't know that I've ever had that come across where we would question that somebody was making up situational factors to not do a foot pursuit, because generally they're there when we're talking to them about it. The supervisor is going to respond and have that conversation with them, shortly thereafter. So if they said it's dark, I didn't know this area, I was by myself, the call load was heavy, those things are going to be able to be corroborated, I guess would be my
Okay,
situation.
I'm just checking, because part of the discussion, and Attorney Jones came prepared, I think, 1 or 2 sessions ago to talk with us was, okay, policy's great, but is it getting followed? Is the coaching happening? Is everybody performing optimally? And so I'm just checking.
I think we make good decisions, but we definitely have the review process for the terminations as well as the continuations.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, do you have any questions on foot pursuits?
No, thank you, Chair.
Can you tell us if you've done any yourself?
I'm a sprinter. I'm not a long runner, so.
I can attest that he has from days gone by.
Is that how you caught your wife?
I plead the fifth.
Okay. Anything else?
That was all I had.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I've worked at 4 different law enforcement agencies and fines and prosecuting.
You might have to come to the mic. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Here, I'll slide one.
Well, he's got the podium too, so he's all right.
You can go to the podium if you want to stand up.
I'll go.
You won't have to bend down.
I'd like to say that, and I've been here about 9.5 months, and I've got 38 years of experience in various agencies as prosecutor and all of that. And every agency has different problems, but they all have a variety of the same issues, particularly with use of force. And they have internal structures on how to evaluate how you're doing. And I told this to the chief when I first got here, and I've mentioned it before. I think Topeka is exceptional with the policies we had when I got here. And I think the review process is very robust. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the legal advisor. I've seen it lots of places, larger agencies, smaller agencies. And part of that is we've spent so much time on the policies. And I've also watched how we've passed that on to everyone. And we have an incredibly low rate of complaints. We have an incredibly low rate given the number of contacts that we have. And I think one of the reasons is because of the people we have in Topeka. I think we have some really good citizens, law-abiding, and I think we have some exceptional officers. That doesn't mean that they're perfect, doesn't mean that there aren't mistakes and issues, but we have a capability to address them. So that's what I would say.
Could you state your name, please?
Mark Jones.
Okay, thank you. I thought so, but just so if the public would like to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to look at our calendar for January. Whoa, that seems like so far away. But it's here. Mike, do you have anything on the 4th? Actually, because you're going to be out of town, right?
It wouldn't give me a lot of time to prepare.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking if I
I'm
did it.
good, but I may not be that good.
No, you're fine. If we needed something from you, you're going on vacation for 2 weeks, right?
About a week.
About
Yeah,
a week, okay.
I return on the 4th. So,
Okay, yeah, that would not do it. On the 18th, Mike, Karen?
That's Martin Luther King
I'm
holiday.
wide open.
Oh, that's
Yeah, I don't have
That's Martin
anything.
Luther King?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't have anything scheduled.
I don't either, but the staff probably doesn't want to come.
Are they off on the 8th? You guys? Staff
You
is
say the
off.
18th?
Yeah,
That's Martin Luther King Day.
yeah. Okay. Let's do, how about the 21st of January? Thursday at 3 o'clock.
I have another standing meeting, so I wouldn't want it to go to that every month, but I could
Oh,
miss
that,
it if I
okay,
needed to.
okay. Let's go to the 14th. 14th at 3 o'clock?
What date again? I couldn't hear.
Ditto.
1-4, you have another meeting?
14th, Thursday, yeah, I can do that.
Karen can't, right, Karen?
I would be better off on the 21st, probably. If I have to miss one of them. Are we
about-
talking about going
how
to
about
Thursday
Wednesday,
afternoon
13th?
as a rule?
No, I'm just trying to fill in some dates in there.
Okay.
What about Friday the 15th?
I can do that.
I can do that.
Okay, Liz, if you can check Friday the 5th, January the 15th at 3 o'clock.
That looks available.
LEC,
I'll double check on that, but the date is fine. We don't have any other meetings that day, so.
If
I'll
not-
just
if
at least
not,
the
here
date and
would-
time.
here would be fine. If we can't get the LEC, it's fine. Just let us know.
Okay,
Okay,
I can do that.
all right, thank you. And I will get with Liz to see what else we want, where else we want to go. Okay, to set the agenda. Okay, so you'll probably have it when you come back,
yeah.
if not before. Okay, anything else? Yes.
We, Attorney Jones came a meeting or two ago with a stack of files. I think he had understood from the meeting prior to that that we were interested in perhaps an executive session where they could actually talk to us as a committee anyway, and brief us on actually some examples of the internal management of.
Well, first, we'd all have to be together if we wanted to do that, number one. Number two, I'm not sure if we can do that. I'd have to talk to Lisa, and I don't want to talk to her on the air. I'd talk to her in
That's fine.
person.
I just wanted, he brought them
Yes.
and I just wanted to make sure it didn't
Yes.
fall off radar because he slugged a pile of.
And I would like to talk, all of us as committee members, to make sure that we all three want to do that.
That's fine.
So those are the three
I
things.
just wanted
Yeah.
to remind because we talked
Yeah,
about it a
I
few
just
times
wanted to
ago.
finish what we've already had, to continue the process. And I will do a recap to get back to the council members of what we've accomplished so far. Mike, do you have anything before we go?
No, just to thank you, Chair, for this meeting and for everyone who's been listening in. I hope that they're pleased with the work that we're trying to do, and we're pleased with the department and it's being forthcoming with everything that they're doing internally. I really appreciate the comments you said earlier about transparency. I think we've been transparent as much as possible, and I think the department's doing a good job with that. So I just want to add that and ask everybody to wear a mask, stay safe, and enjoy the holidays and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to, I seen, Mr. Colasso, do you want to add anything? I see you've been joining us.
Not at this time. Thank you for the opportunity. Everyone have a blessed holiday. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chief, we appreciate you being with us today, even if it wasn't in person. We'll miss you, but I believe your right hand, who you're leaving in charge, is pretty good here. So I think we'll be in good company. If not, I'll whip them into shape. You know I will.
Thank you.
This meeting's adjourned. Thank you to all. Have a word with you.